Hey everybody, today is August 28th, which makes it my son's 3rd birthday. And it's a bittersweet day for me because it was literally the hardest day of my life, followed by the best 3 years of my life. But I thought today I would share with you why that is and why the experience of having my son has made me a better therapist. So it was the day before my due date, and I went into labor. We labored at home for a couple hours. The doula kind of said it's time to go, so we took the whole show to the hospital. Got to the hospital. I was having really intense contractions really close together. They hooked me up to the monitors and decided that my son was in a little bit of distress. And I should preface at this point the story, spoiler alert, everybody's fine, everybody's happy and healthy. But when your midwife looks at you and says, we think you should have a C-section, I was like, okay. And that's kind of where the shenanigans started. So I guess there was a problem administering the epidural. Later, my sister said she found 5 bruises on my back that she identified as probable, failed epidural applications. So after a while of trying to inject stuff into my spine while I'm having these crazy stacked contractions, they decide to completely put me under. They do that, do the C-section. My son is fine. And as I come out of it and am recuperating the next day, I'm on a morphine drip. And I don't really like it because I feel pain and I administer it myself and I get dizzy, not dizzy, but drowsy and fall asleep. And then also I'm breastfeeding my son. I'm not sure how I feel about that. So somebody from the hospital comes and says, oh, you're not taking a lot of your pain medication. We want to make sure you stay ahead of it. What's going on? And I tell her I'm not really into it. So they take me off of the drip and give me Percocet, which I also don't like because the same thing happens. I'm in pain, I take it, fall asleep, also still breastfeeding. That goes on for about a day, and then they're ready to discharge me. They say, how are you doing with the pain medication? Same speech. Don't really like it. I get drowsy. Also, I'm concerned about breastfeeding. The nurse then says, oh, well, there's something else we can try. She gives me another pill, and we get set up to discharge. We get home, and at that time, by the time we get home, I can barely walk. We get us all into the house, and I lose track of what time it is. I'm not able to answer very basic questions, what day it is, where am I, that kind of thing. My family becomes concerned that I'm having a stroke, call 911, go back into the hospital, and it's only been an hour since I've discharged, so the same doctor at discharge is now my admitting doctor, and that'll become relevant here in a second. And so they do the CAT scan, not having a stroke, good news, but at that point decide that what's going on with me is I'm having a psychotic break because due to a traumatic birth. And they want to admit me with postpartum psychosis to the psych ward. And at this point, there's some information they don't have, admittedly because they didn't ask, but the significant information is that 1, I am a therapist. 2, I'm there with my father, who is a psychologist. And 3, I'm there with my sister, who's a nurse. And not only is she a nurse, she works for Department Health as a trauma coordinator. She goes into emergency rooms and certifies them, right? And what we know at this point is no behavioral health assessment has been done. And I know this because I do them for a living, right? So what we think is happening is that, the other thing, my sister, who, because of her position, is not only able to pull my chart, she's also knows what she's looking for, and that last painkiller isn't on there. So what we as a family think is going on, that at this point the hospital is trying to cover up a potentially fatal mistake that they made by calling me crazy. So luck would have it, the psych ward is full that night. So they admit me overnight. I'm on suicide watch. I'm not alone in my room. My poor husband stays with me the whole time, doesn't let me leave his side because he's terrified if he gets up and leaves, they're going to whisk me away to the psych ward, and who knows when they're going to see me again, right? The next day, I start to become more clear. I'm communicating a lot better, not 100% at all, but I'm coming back to myself, and the hospital's still saying I'm psychotic, I need to be admitted, which is making no sense. And this whole thing hinges on the psychiatrist on call is going to have a conversation with me, and the result of that conversation will be either I get to go home, be with my newborn baby, or I get admitted to the psych ward. Okay, so I'm preparing myself to have this conversation with the psychiatrist, and it dawns on me that the harder I try to convince her that I'm not crazy, the crazier I'm going to sound. If she walks in and I say, I'm not crazy, but they gave me a pill that's not on the chart and they're not admitting to it, and they just want me to go to the psych ward so that they can cover up their mistake, that's going to get me into the psych ward, right? So, psychiatrist comes in. I actually have a professional. She was probably the most compassionate of the people at the hospital that we dealt with, but she kind of gets what's going on right away. Hindsight, we believe it was probably a painkiller, not an overdose, but too much drugs in my system. So as time is going by and my body's processing it, I'm getting clearer and clearer. She can see that, I can see that, my family can see that. The hospital staff was harder to convince, but she works her magic, the psychiatrist. I get to come home. And there was a moment, when it was after I had had the conversation with the psychiatrist, and I'm in my hospital room with my father, who's, again, not only a psychiatrist, he used to be director of the counseling department at CSU. He used to train counselors. And he says to me, this will make you a better clinician. And I didn't get it at the time. But in hindsight, I realized that ever since that day, I hear the phrase, I'm not crazy, very differently than I did before, right? And ever since that day, I orient to kind of ask myself the question, what if I start by believing the client and the patient? What if I start there, no matter what family is saying, no matter what other clinical professionals are saying? What if I sit down in front of somebody for the first time and I believe the first words that come out of their mouth? And I tell you, it has changed the way I work for the better. I trust the patients and the clients more. My clients trust me more. And it's never led me astray. I haven't regretted it since. I'm going to say it's a little harder to start there, especially with children. But if I can do it, if I even have a kiddo in front of me, right, trouble at school, and I listen to what they have to say first and believe them. They read it, they get it, and I feel like it communicates to them that I get what it's like to be uncomfortable and in pain and not feeling well already, and then the exhaustion it takes to then have to advocate for your truth after that. So that's the story of the blessing my son has been in all of the ways, and not least among them that he gave me this experience of changing the way I work clinically and changing the way I work with my clients. All right. Be well, guys.